What is up, everybody? Welcome in to Shout at Buffalo Bills football podcast on this beautiful Wednesday afternoon. Ryan, it is November 6th, and the weather is absolutely gorgeous. And I feel like we're just buying time before the eventual turn to the brisk winter weather. But it has been a nice departure over the last couple of weeks, and the Bills are departing in 3 days to Indianapolis for a game against the Colts. A lot of action over the last 24 hours. The Bills bring back a couple of defensive players. We're going to get into those in a few minutes. And then obviously the latest on the injury front. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. I think that nice weather, though, is affecting my voice a little bit. Have some sinuses going on with the weather fluctuating the way it's going, but overall, can't complain.
Well, that's good. That's good to hear. I'm glad that you're in good spirits. And there's no better way to get into the holiday season of festive spirits than participating in the Christmas bonus program, Tops Friendly Markets. And right now, you shop at Tops and you could save $10 at all of your other favorite stores and restaurants. With over 25 gift cards to choose from, there's something for everyone on your list. And don't forget to treat yourself to some extra savings too. Save on great gifts like toys and games from GameStop or Toys R Us at Macy's, things for your home from Lowe's, that big screen TV you want from Best Buy, and so much more just by shopping at Tops. Be Santa's biggest little helper with Christmas bonus from Tops. For a complete list of available gift card savings, visit topsmarkets.com/Christmas bonus. Ryan, will or won't Keon Coleman play against the Indianapolis Colts? That's probably been one of the biggest questions of the last couple of days when it comes to the Bills' injury situation. Amari Cooper in a walkthrough today was limited. Seems like he's kind of slowly progressing in a good direction. He was 50-50 to play on Sunday. You'd think he'd have a better shot at it this weekend. But right now, I saw Keon Coleman in the locker room today. He did not speak to the media, didn't have anything on his hand last time we spoke. He had that brace on his hand after the injury. Sean McDermott said he's hopeful. He thinks it's a little bit more of maybe a week-to-week thing, but he's not ready on Wednesday to rule him out for Sunday's game. So that's hopeful. Maybe it's something that won't be on the more long-term end of things. But I think the best way to approach this is the Bills should probably prepare to be without Keon Coleman Sunday against the Colts.
Yeah, I would think that the Bills would tend to go that direction with Keon Coleman. They're usually very cautious with injuries. Sean McDermott saying, not 100% certain that he'll miss this week's game. If you use the term week to week, I feel like under Sean McDermott, you're going to miss a game, maybe miss 2 games. It all depends on the severity of the injury, which we don't have a lot of details on right now, which, again, they say there are ongoing evaluations taking place, but it's going to most likely be no Keon Coleman this week if you're asking me right now what my gut feeling is. And then you kind of go from there. I feel like they can beat this Colts team without Keon Coleman, especially if you get Amari Cooper back into the fold. Now, if you're missing a few pieces in that offense, it certainly becomes more difficult.
It does. And, if you get Cooper back, or even if you don't get Cooper back, let's walk through this scenario. You don't have Cooper, you don't have Coleman. You get another week for maybe Curtis Samuel to get healthier. This is something I want to talk to you about really quickly because I asked Joe Brady, man, it feels like everybody's eating in this offense except Curtis Samuel this season. And so what's kind of led into that? And he kind of laid it out pretty truthfully. It's like Curtis Samuel probably shouldn't have even been out there on Sunday against the Miami Dolphins. He's playing through the shoulder injury, probably got back a little bit sooner than they wanted, but that speed element at the very least is something that teams have to defend against. So I think what we've seen, Ryan, through 9 games, and we've talked a little bit about this, is a Curtis Samuel who has not been 100% healthy. You hope now a week later he's getting healthier and is ready for more of a larger role. But I mean, in this game, if they don't have Coleman, if they don't have Cooper, I'm kind of looking at Samuel to step up in this spot.
Yeah, you need him to. And I think there is some bad luck involved with Curtis Samuel. It was turf toe at the beginning of the year. He was probably out there playing at less than 100%. And we've seen how turf toe lingers for some players, multiple weeks, sometimes throughout the entire season. And now he suffers another injury. And Joe Brady says he probably shouldn't have been out there. There's been these very, few glimpses here and there of what he can do. It's been few and far between. But I think the health is a big part of it. And if they are without Keon Coleman and Amari Cooper, you're right. They need him to step up, not just be that speed guy. You know you're going to get contributions out of Khalil Shakir. You'd like to see more out of Dalton Kincaid too. But in terms of who really hasn't been able to step up or who hasn't stepped up yet, that's Curtis Samuel, and you're going to need him on Sunday. With, even if Amari Cooper plays, I still feel like you need something from him to give you that more viable threat downfield. I know that Josh Allen's doing a good job of taking what the defense gives them, but if he can take a shot here and there, they're going to have to respect that deep game, and it might even change how they play underneath, and that obviously helps free things up for the offense.
And I don't know if they elevate Jalen Virgil again this week, but at this point, I think Joe Brady has everybody right where he wants them, because when Virgil's on the field, defenses pretty much can bet on it that they're going to run the football. So, I mean, you really now have baked in a little bit of intrigue if he is on the field. And I don't think they'll elevate him again. They've been in this kind of mode of like, Elianku has had these 2 elevations, right? If they were to elevate him a 3rd time, they would have to sign him to the 53-man roster. Right. To do that, I see it in the comments here, and we're going to get to that in a second, the defensive tackle situation, maybe releasing a Zion Logue who hasn't played. Well, you know what you have in Elianku. You probably want to get a look at these 2 new guys. We'll talk about that in a minute. I don't want to put the cart before the horse there. But you have a lot of different options when it comes to who you're going to elevate off your practice squad. And I still maintain KJ Hamler, like the way Brandon Beane talked about him in the offseason, I always thought there was an outside chance the Bills could keep 6 wide receivers and have Hamler be that kind of quasi gadget guy, wide receiver depth guy, special teams, like returner role type of guy. We haven't seen him yet. I wouldn't rule out maybe him getting an opportunity if those 2 guys, Coleman and Cooper, can't go.
Which makes sense because you haven't used an elevation there yet. You've already used Shavers this year. You've done 2 on Jalen Virgil, and he'd be in the same boat where you'd have to either sign him to the 53 or let him go after a 3rd elevation, which I don't see a path on at least in the wide receiver room right now to make that happen. So, yeah, KJ Hamler is probably that next man up. They obviously signed Deon Cain, someone they liked in that short glimpse over the preseason when they had him in for the last preseason game, and he performed well. So they seem to have a plan in place in terms of if we need to go this route, we can depend on this player. And KJ Hamler is that guy that's been here the longest of those players in terms of no elevations yet, where Cain just came back. So Hamler absolutely could be an elevation this weekend against Indianapolis.
Some questions about just the rest of the injury report. We mentioned Amari Cooper. If you go through here, the only limited players, Kyer Elam with the shoulder injury, he suffered in the game. Reggie Gilliam still working through the hip. Coleman didn't practice. Curtis Samuel limited. Everybody else was full. Now, it was a walkthrough. So Christian Benford, that's the big name on here. He was full in a walkthrough on Wednesday. We'll see if the pads go on Thursday, if he is full again. But I think he's probably trending in a really good direction for this weekend.
Which is huge. I know Joe Flacco did not play particularly well in his re-debut, whatever you want to call it, with the Colts this past weekend. They put up 6 points, but the Colts have, Josh Downs. They have some guys that can hurt you, and you want to be at full strength at cornerback. So if Benford is healthy and ready to go, that's going to be a big boost for this defense on Sunday.
Speaking of a boost, you're boosting these numbers. Everybody watching across all the platforms a little bit earlier than usual. We really appreciate you. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel as well. Give you a little ping every time that we go live. And also get out your calendar. November 16th, we're coming back to Wingnuts, 10 days away. We will be there Saturday night before the Bills play the Chiefs, hosting a live podcast this month. We're also coming to Turning Stone, November 30th. What's up, everybody? Matt Parrino here with Ryan Talbot. We're the host of the Shout Buffalo Bills Football Podcast, and we have some big news. We're coming back to Turning Stone Resort Casino. That's right, New York Rec and Social Club, November 30th, the night before the Bills host the San Francisco 49ers. It is going to be a night of Bills football, talking, food, everything, Ryan. We cannot wait.
That's right, Matt. Nobody travels like the Bills Mafia. Come out and join us for the podcast and hang out with us after. The event is open to the public. Guests must be 18 years or older. Come out and let's get after it.
It's going to be a live edition of Shout a Buffalo Bills Football Podcast. We're previewing Bills versus 49ers. See you then. got him again. I'm looking at the screen. I hit the promo. You didn't even know I was hitting it, and you're like talking a mile a minute. Got you again.
I swear you just wait for me to start talking and you hit the button. That's what it feels like here. But excited about Wingnuts and about Turning Stone, both on the horizon here this month.
All right, let's get into this defensive line, Ryan. Heading into the trade deadline, it felt like, taking a look across the landscape and the price that some people paid for some players, you saw a couple guys get dealt. Tre'Davious White goes for a 7th rounder. Honestly, I thought that, he was on his way to probably getting released. So, a 7th rounder is whatever, but Baltimore taking a little bit of a flyer there. Marshawn Lattimore goes for what I believe was a 3rd, 4th, and maybe 6th, and they get a 5th back. Whatever that deal was, they paid a lot to get Marshawn Lattimore. Did the Washington Commanders. I thought from that perspective, or the AFC perspective, Ravens fans, Bills fans were thrilled when they saw that deal because it meant that he wasn't going to the Chiefs. And I guess that the Ravens were kind of in the mix there as well. So Bills fans really lucked out in that department. The Bills, I think, kind of probably connected to a couple guys, maybe none more so than Sebastian Joseph Day. And I think in the end, what they probably realized was, why give up a certain amount of draft capital for, if that ends up being a 5th rounder that you got to give up for Sebastian Joseph Day, maybe instead of that, go and do what the Bills did, which was wait to see who becomes available. Quinton Jefferson, Jordan Phillips, they swoop on both of those guys, and then kind of keep your fingers crossed that you get Dwayne Carter back once he recovers from the wrist injury, Dewan Smoot as well. That's the path that they're going. And I think we're also maybe overvaluing Joseph Day a little bit. I would have been a little bit more excited about some of the other names that potentially could have been had, but the Miami Dolphins were standing pat. It felt like the Cleveland Browns didn't want to do anything else. What else are you going to do if you're Brandon Beane? You don't want to give up too much, and at the same time, you got to kind of add some bodies here, and that's what they did.
Yeah, I like Joseph Day. He's having a good season, but someone asked me after the deadline, how much would that have moved the bar for you in terms of Buffalo's maybe Super Bowl chances? And in the grand scheme of things, not much. He would have bolstered the D-line a little bit, but this was not a premier D tackle that they'd be bringing in some, great player on a great contract like Amari Cooper is. This was a guy that the Bills could have signed in free agency, to be quite honest, and they opted not to. He signs in Tennessee, and then they have a chance to potentially try to trade for him, and it just doesn't happen. So, the one part of it is, no, he doesn't, get you closer to that finish line of hoisting the Lombardi trophy, at least not by a significant margin. Now, when you compare it to who they re-signed, you could definitely reevaluate that conversation and say that Joseph Day is much better than a guy like, Jordan Phillips. And Quinton Jefferson, we'll talk about him. I'm actually excited to see what Jefferson can do in his second stint in Buffalo, though.
So so there's a couple things to unpack here. First of all, at his very best, and I think he's very much removed from that, Jordan Phillips was a 3rd down pass rushing savant, like early or in his time with the Bills. But that's back in 2019, right? Like that was what got him his big contract in Arizona. When he came back to Buffalo, he wasn't the same player. There were a bunch of issues, penalties, injuries, availability, a ton of things. For me, Jordan Phillips is DT5, and whatever you get from him is a bonus. To me, Jefferson's a little bit more impressive of an addition, because I think you can really truly now have him be, until at least Carter gets back, what he's meant to be, right? That backup 3 tech in a rotational role. Let him be a bit of a pass rusher. He's a little bit better of a run defender, even, I think, than at times Austin Johnson has been. But you could push Johnson now back into that 3 tech role, and you still have Elianku as kind of the backup plan. Get a look at this over the next couple of weeks, and scary as that might sound, because you got the Chiefs coming up in 2 weeks. In a month, you have the San Francisco 3 weeks, you have San Francisco 49ers. And then it's Detroit, LA. There's a couple of really good teams on the horizon.
Yeah.
But I think looking at this now, seeing what you have, you can kind of reevaluate things. Guys might become available even later in the season that pop up. And I still think that you have that, the Zion Logue thing is interesting too. It's like he's been here for a little while now. He got thrown into the mix early, a rookie player, 6th-round draft pick. Maybe it's taken a little bit of a time, but does he get maybe thrown out there in an opportunity this week even? Bobby Babich was talking about contingency plans that they've kind of been building over the course of time. It might be a week-to-week thing where, all right, one week it might be Jordan Phillips. The next week it might be Jefferson. The next week it could be Logue. Next week it could be Elianko. There could be a bunch of different options that they kind of look at, but they're going to have to do it like by numbers, and that hasn't necessarily worked over the last couple of years, Ryan.
No, it hasn't worked out well. And, in the case of Jordan Phillips, someone said it best, there's nowhere to go but up. This was the the last place defensive tackle in terms of Pro Football Focus's rankings. The effort was definitely questionable during his time in Dallas. In certain plays, he was getting pushed around at times. But there is something to be said about sometimes a player just fits into your scheme for whatever reason. And during his time in Buffalo, he's made some splash plays in his stints here. And I'm not, advocating for this being a good signing. I don't think it's a good signing for that matter, but just came off the IR in Dallas. They released him off of that. Who knows about the conditioning in terms of getting back up to speed or ramping him up. Wouldn't shock me if he was inactive this week and Zion Logue took that spot. In terms of Quinton Jefferson, I like that move a lot. I know he didn't play a lot this season in Cleveland. He was great, though, with the Jets in 2023, 6 sacks, double-digit QB hits. He's been, even the year before that, he had a really nice season. His first go-around in Buffalo did not work. He was released after 1 year on that 2-year deal. He had to play out of place in 2020 due to Star Lotulelei opting out of that COVID season. It kind of made the Bills have to use him in ways that were not strong suits. I know he had the position versatility, could play both spots on the interior, even has some a little outside flexibility. Here now in this second stint, you can play him behind Ed Oliver. You can have him kind of playing that Dwayne Carter role for the next few weeks in terms of the snap count. And you know what you're going to get. The last 3 seasons, 42 quarterback hits, 10 sacks total. So he does pop at times in terms of what he can do. And I think this second go around, if they play him in the right role, and you've mentioned it too, I'll let you talk about it, maybe even playing a Dwayne Smoot type of role where he can play a little bit outside as well. I think that's better than what they did in that first stint where they were forced to kind of use him out of place.
Well, now that they have like an example in their defense where it worked, right? Like Smoot kind of was an experiment in a lot of ways. They've never really truly leaned into, even Shaq Lawson all those years who could play on the inside at times. They never really leaned into that a ton. We were waiting for it for a couple of years. Greg Rousseau was the greatest example. When they drafted him, Brandon Beane came out and said, yeah, we really like some of the stuff that we saw on tape from the interior as a pass rusher. A lot of his sacks his last year at Miami came on the inside, and the Bills just don't use guys in that way. And I think you can have a little bit more freedom now that we've seen it with Smoot at times. The thing with Jefferson, and I want to get back to Phillips too in a second, but let's first focus in on Jefferson because you bring him up. I think they need somebody that can be another additional presence as a pass rusher, because I think Austin Johnson, I thought, was poised to really show something in that department in the Seattle game. I liked his get off. I mentioned it on that post-game show, and then it just kind of evaporated against Miami. I didn't see a lot of it. I think Ed Oliver has been hampered by this hamstring injury. I think every time that he sustains an injury like this, it takes a little bit of a window of time for him to get back to full force. And for whatever's going on with Daquan Jones, I don't know what it is. I think it could potentially be, hey, I'm a year older. I had a big injury last year. I am going to leave some in the tank for December and January. And he hasn't said that. I'm just making a guess as a guy that has, saw it play out last year where you played the month of your life through those first 5 games in a system where you finally truly feel like you could be yourself. And then you have that injury, you come back, you're not the same version of yourself. And in the biggest game of the season, it wasn't what he wanted. So maybe it's almost like, let me ramp up to what I want to be. And now there's a little bit more depth behind him. Jefferson, for, all of his faults, he can play, I think, 3 different spots on the defensive line. If you need him in a pinch, he can play nose tackle. It's not where you want him, and the Bills played him too much there a couple of years ago. But I think they can now lean into him a little bit more as that 3 tech behind Oliver, and then maybe even pushing him outside as a pass rusher.
Yeah, and for that reason, the versatility, the experience in this system, it was no surprise that the two guys that they signed today both have experience in this system. They know the defense. That helps with the turnaround in terms of injuries and having to get them onto the field. It's not new terminology necessarily. And I know, it's Bobby Babich calling the plays, but this is still a Sean McDermott defense. So these guys are going to be able to come in and pretty much fit right into the system, understand it, pick it up pretty easily, pretty quickly. And when it comes to Quinton Jefferson, you can get creative with his usage. Obviously, you want to play him behind that Oliver, ideally, maybe get him on the edge a little bit. And then Jordan Phillips, he's made plays in Buffalo. It doesn't hurt to have him as, like you said, DT5 when you give him the opportunity. But in terms of keeping him on the field, he'll have to earn that. He'll have to show that it's worth having him out there and that he's worth a roster spot when you get, Dwayne Carter back and you get more of an evaluation of these other guys on your roster, even a Zion Logue. Is it better to keep the veteran like Phillips for the stretch run, or are we seeing enough out of Logan practice? Those are the decisions the Bills are going to have to make in due time. Elianku as well. Do you use his final elevation and then sign him to the main roster? It's not a bad problem to have all these extra bodies. Obviously, though, these were not overwhelming additions. We're not sitting here saying that the Bills are going to the Super Bowl now because of either of these guys joining the roster today.
The Jordan Phillips piece is, the more I think about it, the more interesting it becomes, because I was a little bit harsh on it on social media right as it was happening, taking a quick look at his stats, mentioning the fact that he was the lowest graded defensive tackle as a run defender this season. But a lot of that had to do with the fact that he hasn't played a lot. Like, he's only played less than 50 snaps. He's been on injured reserve, which you mentioned earlier today. And, you bring up his career numbers, you put them up on Pro Football Focus. And I know that that's not the perfect barometer of a player measuring stick, if you will, but take a look at these numbers. So 583 snaps was the second most in his career in 2019. He ended up with 10 sacks that season, 9.5 sacks, 29 quarterback pressures, 6 quarterback hits, and then 13 hurries. That was a career mark for him.
Right.
Now, last season in Buffalo, he played 391 snaps. And honestly, I didn't think it was very good. Across the board, a lot of red as a run defender, as an overall defensive grade. He graded out with a 57.4 pass rushing grade, which is very much average or a little bit below average. He had 19 pressures. So that's 10 less than the 29 he had in 2019. 2.5 sacks or 3 sacks, 14 quarterback hurries. I think as a fifth guy, as a situational guy, as a pass rusher at his size, he can potentially help you. What I don't like are the run defense grades over the last couple of seasons. He graded out as a run defender last year, 30 in the red. That is about as bad as it gets. He was absolutely unusable against the run for the Bills last season. And to me, I look at this defensive line, and that's the conversation I think if you're Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane and you're talking to Jordan Phillips, that's what I'm asking him first. Where's your willingness level at 32 years old to come in here and defend the run a little bit more like you did in 2019 when he had the best grade of his career at 61.4 in 583 snaps against the run? 20 stops. That's the most of his career. PFF does that. They how many run stops are you responsible for? That was the most in his career, 20 in 2019. They need that Jordan Phillips.
And if I'm Jordan Phillips, I think that you're not exactly a hot commodity across the league, and you need to step up in Buffalo. This might be your last chance to hang around in this league, and you're maybe 1 or 2 bad games away from being released in Buffalo, and maybe they sign you to the practice squad. But is that how you want to go out, or do you want to show that you are a valuable contributor to this team with your limited reps when your number is called? It's fascinating because, Dallas signed him. They put him on the IR. He kind of complained and said, there's nothing wrong with my wrist. And yet he still went. He hasn't performed well outside of Buffalo. So I think he knows this is possibly it for him if he doesn't get it together with the Bills.
Thank you so much for watching. Almost 1,500 on this Wednesday late afternoon, a little bit earlier than usual. And I think our Wednesday shows actually, Ryan, are going to be a little bit earlier on over the next couple of weeks. So just plan for that. Hopefully it works out for your schedule. If not, you can always watch it on the replay or catch it on the audio side. We're on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcast, you can find the Shout Podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe as well. Super chat here from Stumbo over on YouTube. Hi, who did we sign? I missed it yesterday. The Bills actually today signed Quinton Jefferson and Jordan Phillips. We talked about that a ton over the last 20 minutes. Rewind, you can hear a lot about both of them. All right, we got a couple of questions, Ryan. Before we get to that, I want everybody to sign up to become a Shout Buffalo Bills insider, because what it gives you is direct access to us on a day like this when we're asking for questions. You can get your voice heard, talk about specific topics that you want us to talk about, and you can join by texting 716-528-6727. Sign up, you get a free trial. Then it's for 2 weeks, $3.99 a month after that. And it's awesome. It's access to us anytime you want. We answer questions. We give you some deeper analysis, pass along PFF grades, anything off the rewatch of the game. It's a lot of good stuff. And the Shout text line is brought to you by Carrie C. Byer, attorney with the law offices of Francis M. Litro, located at 237 Main Street in Buffalo, New York. If you or someone you know is seriously injured, give them a call, 716-852-1234, or check out litrolaw.com.
Well said, Matt. Well said. Let's get to those insider questions.
I love doing that. Sometimes, every once in a while, I like to just stop and just let a little awkward pause happen. Just
the master of the awkward pause.
Yeah. Sorry about that, buddy. All right. So we got a couple questions here. When is Micah Hyde coming back? Michael asks. Milano and Hyde coming back the same day? ? So we got a little bit of an interesting Matt Milano piece today. Terrell Bernard was asked about potentially playing again with Matt Milano, and he talked about his excitement level to when he gets back, getting a chance to finally, it seems like this has been a year in the making, right? We were talking about the excitement early last season with Bernard and Milano, and they got 5 games together before Milano missed the rest of the season. Obviously, what happened during training camp this year, never got to see that pairing. So that's something that's exciting. The Micah Hyde thing, Ryan, is I just don't, I'm not seeing it right now. If there's an injury to one of their starters, or it really goes off the rails in mid to late December, that to me is when we're going to pull the Micah Hyde lever. But until then, I just don't see it being something that you need to do. I think that the Bills defense has found its own new identity. I think they have to be a better against the run, but I don't think Micah Hyde's going to really help that in his state at this point of his career, being almost a year without football. I think that there's probably other options. And if you look at it right now, they go 4 deep at safety on their roster. They have the starters right now in Taylor Rapp and DeMar Hamlin. They have Cam Lewis. They have Cole Bishop, who is the next in line. Even if they sign Micah Hyde today, if there's an injury to Hyde or Hamlin, I think it's going to be Cole Bishop that goes in next up. So I don't think the Micah Hyde option is that much on deck at this point on November 6th.
No, I agree with that. There's no clear path to a roster spot for him. I also get the question, because if you do sign him, you think you have to give him that ramp up period, a few weeks of practice before you can utilize him. And the longer we talk about this, the later we get into the season, the more unrealistic, I guess, it becomes. If we're sitting here having this conversation in early December, are they going to bring him back at that point? Because then you ramp him up. Maybe it's the last 2 weeks of the regular season, but are you going to play him in the playoffs? It comes down to injuries. They're healthy right now. Other guys have been let go that they've looked at over the years. And Nick McLeod, for instance, was a guy that they cross-trained a little bit. Not saying that he's on their radar right now, but Micah Hyde, as much as I think Bills fans want him back, as much as I still think in my gut it's going to happen, there's no spot for him right now. It's going to take an injury. It's going to take an open roster spot in some way, shape, or form for it to occur. And right now, that's just not the case.
A lot of this comes up because Mike Edwards, we haven't had a podcast on this yet. He was released on Tuesday. It's already like been, filed down the news order here, the priority list. But he was released. He asked for his release. Obviously a guy that wanted to compete for a starting job. And I think it's interesting that he gets cut on Tuesday, becomes a free agent. Where does he end up? Tennessee, right? You know why he ends up in Tennessee? Because Tennessee isn't any good. They have an opening and he's going to play. He's not going to play on a contender. Like, that's the thing about Mike Edwards that I think has been, and I think I'm as guilty of it as anybody else, like maybe just prognosticating this in a incorrect way. This is a career backup who had 1 year as an everyday starter because of a lack of options in Tampa Bay after the Super Bowl year. And what has happened since then is he went to be a backup in Kansas City. He went to be to fight for a starting job in Buffalo because Poyer and Hyde had left. But I think it's an indictment of Edwards that he couldn't beat out DeMar Hamlin. And that's not to say that DeMar Hamlin hasn't been good. He has been good. I think he's been better than I even expected him to be. Right. But I think Edwards is a guy that's been in the league all of these years. For him not to be able to beat out DeMar Hamlin tells you where he is in the league. And the fact that nobody else was really interested in bringing him in, or maybe they were, and he thought, listen, he's in a spot in his career that if he doesn't get any kind of extended time to prove that he could put a lot of good stuff on tape, he's never going to get another really big bite of the apple on even like a, $3 to $4 or $5 million a season contract. So this is his attempt to do that. And it's actually a good risk because the Titans have a really good defense. It's just not going to be on a team that really matters at this point of the season.
Right. So, he's betting on himself over another potential Super Bowl. Which I get. I understand it. He's had some opportunities in his career in Kansas City. He had opportunities in Tampa Bay. Right now, it's probably more of a priority for him to show what he can do on film, get another contract in free agency next year. He came into Buffalo, and Buffalo has pretty much said that they were kind of planning to make him one of their starters to open the year, but then he had the injury at training camp. And that put him behind the 8 ball, and DeMar Hamlin has not looked back. He has been better than people want to give him credit for. He is not an all-pro, Pro Bowl type safety. He never will be, but he's solid. He's been tackling well. He had a great tackle grade in that matchup against Miami, a team that if you miss one tackle, they're off to the races. He's been better than a lot of people want to give him credit for. He's filled in capably, and he's just never opened that door for Mike Edwards, and now Edwards had to go elsewhere where, like you said, he's going to have a lot of chances to play in Tennessee, but they're going nowhere fast this season.
I saw a comment here, and I'm trying to bring it up. The numbers. Let me see if I can find it. So the comment is from our good buddy Charles G saying they gave Edwards starter money. Big miss for Beane in free agency. So I'm looking up safety contracts on spottrack.com right now. I'm to 81 on the safety list, and I still haven't gotten to Mike Edwards' name. They signed him to a $2.5 million contract with 1.5 or 1.6 million guaranteed. So 1.6 million guaranteed, that's just barely above the vet minimum. You give him that contract because of the lack of options that they had in free agency. They brought in Justin Blackmon, who, this is the part I would agree with. I was more on the Blackmon train because I think he's a little bit more of a turnover creator than Mike Edwards. I talked to Taylor Rapp last week about Mike Edwards, and he said, listen, we think he's a ball hawk. Like, we think he's somebody that could play at a high level. Players thought that. It didn't seem like the coaches really thought that. And the problem is, once you get a guy into your system that wasn't before, we've seen this over the course of McDermott's tenure. Sometimes best laid plans don't work out because the fit isn't necessarily there once you get the guy in the building. I'm not trying to make an excuse for Brandon Beane, but like, I don't necessarily, give him a demerit for bringing in a guy that you're hoping works out. And once you get him in the building, it just didn't. And they had other options. They spent a draft asset at the position. They brought in, they brought back Taylor Rapp. They had a guy in house in Cam Lewis that they liked as well. Would I prefer them go get Blackmon? Yes, he was a little bit more expensive and they didn't have it at the time. They brought in Edwards and it didn't work out.
Yeah, and like you said, 2.5 or 2.8 million, whatever it ended up being, on a 1-year deal is not breaking the bank. You were hoping he could be a starter, and that'd be, a good deal for if you had a starter under contract at that type of money at that contract. And didn't work out at the end of the day. I think that if it was up to the Bills, they still would have rostered him the rest of the way in the event of an injury. He wanted out, though. They respected that. They released him after not being able to pull off any kind of trade. And, you tip your cap to teams like that, too, because the Bills could have said, you signed the contract here. You just haven't had the chance to play, and give it time. If there's an injury, you're going to get on the field. I get, disgruntled players. You don't want that in the locker room. You don't want there to be any issues. Not saying that he had been at this point. But if you don't release him, who knows what happens. Mike Edwards is going to be fine in Tennessee. The Bills are going to be fine without him.
If you're watching on YouTube right now, we appreciate you very much. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel as well. A lot going on this month. We're going to be at Wingnuts on November 16th, 6 p.m. Come on out, 1402 Millersport Highway, the night before Bills Chiefs. So that's going to be an absolutely rocking house at Wingnuts. That's going to be as fun as it gets. And then November 30th, we're back at Turning Stone Resort Casino. Do not miss that one. All right, Ryan, let's see what else we have question-wise. Does the release of Mike Edwards hint at a possible Micah Hyde?
There's a lot of Micah Hyde questions.
I get it. We have a lot of like-minded insiders, and we appreciate that. All right, Ryan asks, if Von Miller returns to form and plays well down the stretch, is there a world where the Bills keep him for next season? Or do you think the savings of almost $18 million on the cap, if he's released post June 1st, going to be too much to overlook? What are your thoughts?
I think this is it for Von in Buffalo. I would be surprised. Returning to form to me is double-digit sacks. It's consistent pressure. I said that I wasn't sure we were ever going to see that again. Now, I was eating a little bit of crow early on in the season when he really flashed in those first few games. But he's going to have to really turn it on here after that 4-game suspension to even look close to returning to form. The Bills would be thrilled if he plays at a high level down the stretch and in the playoffs. I just think that based on the age, based on the risk of injury, now he's dealt with a suspension during his tenure here in Buffalo. You got to move on. You got to try to get younger, find a better use of assets to get that pass rush. I know it's been kind of that missing piece for the Bills over the Sean McDermott tenure, but I don't know if Von Miller coming back for another season is the answer either.
Right, and the thing too is with Von is, what have we seen this season through the first 9 games when he's been on the field? We've seen a player that can do one thing. Right? There's times when the Bills coaching staff can't put him out on the field. So if he ends up becoming, even to your point, back to this 10, 12 sack guy, first of all, you have to project another year into the future that he's going to be able to sustain that if he becomes that. But in a playoff game against the Kansas City Chiefs, if Isaiah Pacheco's back, or the Baltimore Ravens with Derrick Henry, if you can only get Von Miller on the field for 20% of the snaps, is that worth it against some of your most important rivals to try to get over the hump to get to a Super Bowl? I just don't know if at this point of his career, at the money that you're paying him, is it worth it to have that guy? Now, you're going to have to go out and find somebody to do what you want him to do. So if there's not a path to getting that player, I could see a world where they keep him on the roster. But I think the value of moving on from so many things, it's not just the on the field stuff. Like, I still have quite a big issue with the entire, situation that happened off the field last year, what we've heard from the Bills on it, and more so what we haven't heard from the Bills on it. Von Miller coming back after a 4-game suspension, asked multiple times about why he was suspended and saying he's just glad to be able to move on from it. Well, of course you're probably glad to move on from it, but like, what are you moving on from? We still haven't really heard everything I think we need to hear on that, but that's a question for Brandon Beane next time we get a chance to talk to him, and we'll talk more about that at that point. But I think there's a lot of reasons to move on from Von Miller, and we'll see how they piece this thing out. And there's another piece to this whole edge rusher room, and that's the Greg Rousseau piece that you have to make a decision as an organization. Is this going to be somebody that you invest in long-term? He is giving you reason to believe through 9 games, right? Like the some of the advanced stuff we've talked about has been really good, but are you willing to break the bank for a player that maybe is limited as a sack producer long-term? Is this going to be another guy that fits some of the advanced metrics like Ed Oliver did when you gave him his extension, but at times you're still wanting more from? It's a really tough spot to be in with Rousseau and the money that he's probably going to command.
Yeah, and I'm leaning more so towards giving him the deal at this point. He's 24 years old. He has flashed a lot in terms of the metrics, the pressures. You saw the talent, the freakish ability, the way that he ran down Jalen Waddle on that last play in the Dolphins game, where typical DNs or edge rushers can't get a wide receiver like that down on the ground. He did it with ease. In terms of, depending on him to be the guy, I think the Bills would have to get creative. And I know the cap, they're going to be a better spot next year. I just don't know if they can ever throw their hat into the ring for edge rushers with other priorities that they have with like Christian Benford, Khalil Shakir down the road here as well. I think that this would be the one year where you really try to make a move in the draft for one of the best edge rushers, if not the best. You have a first, you have some seconds, get creative if you have to try to move up and get a guy where, all right, you got Rousseau on a sizable deal. You get the guy that you feel is the best pass rusher, a good fit for your system, and you let those guys grow together and hope for the best. I know that that's a roll of the dice, but at the same time, it's a roll of the dice when you sign these veterans, aging veterans in some cases, to these monster contracts, and they never live up to it.
Ryan Talbot and Matt Parrino with you on this Wednesday afternoon. Let me just check the insider text line one more time, make sure we got to all the questions because I don't want to leave anybody hanging. I think we did, Ryan. I think we did a pretty good job on that.
Yeah, a little bit of an overlay there with the Micah Hyde, and we talked about the injury updates already early in the show with Keon Coleman. And if you missed that, insiders, you can always rewind back and hear what we had to say.
Speaking of rewinding it back, I want to rewind back to the beginning of the show when I said that we're brought to you by Topps Friendly Markets and make it current, because right now, Ryan, it is a big time. This weekend, you can get to Topps and get your Slider Sunday going. How much do you love Slider Sunday, Ryan?
As much as I love their breakfast pizza, Matt.
Big time. Get ready for Slider Sunday your way with King's Hawaiian at Topps. Every Sunday is an opportunity to enjoy delicious sliders made your way, and now you can win big while doing it. Vote for your favorite slider weekly for a chance to win tickets to the big game. Grab your favorite King's Hawaiian products from Topps and craft the ultimate sliders to make your Sunday even more special. Visit topsmarkets.com/Slider Sunday. All right, Ryan, that'll do it for us. We'll be back on Friday with the preview show. Just checking the injury report, some things to monitor there on the Indianapolis Colts side. We'll get into all of that on Friday with your game preview. For Ryan, I'm Matt. See you then. Take care, everybody.